The night my daughter asked me to come, I almost said no. I had every reason to. I had a stack of case files on my kitchen counter, a half-eaten bowl of pasta going cold beside them, and exactly zero desire to sit across a dinner table from my ex-husband's new girlfriend and her family. But my daughter, Lily, had looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes and said, "Mom, Grandma Ruth is turning 70. Please, for me." And that was that. You don't say no to a 7-year-old asking you to be brave when she's trying so hard to be brave herself. So I put on a navy dress, told myself it was just 2 hours, and drove 40 minutes to a steakhouse in Riverside that my ex-husband Daniel's mother had rented out for a private party. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I was not going there to cause trouble. I was not going there to prove anything. I was 32 years old. I had rebuilt my life entirely on my own terms after a divorce that nearly broke me, and I was long past the point of needing anyone at that table to validate who I was. I went because my daughter needed me there. That is the only reason, and I think it's important to say that clearly, because what happened next had nothing to do with me looking for a fight. It found me, anyway. The private room was warm and smelled like garlic bread and expensive cologne, round tables with white tablecloths, a small bar in the corner, maybe 30 people milling around with glasses of wine. I spotted Lily immediately. She was standing near the birthday cake display with her father, wearing the yellow dress we'd picked out together the week before. She lit up when she saw me and came running across the room. "You came," she said, like I'd climbed a mountain for her. "Of course I came, baby." I hugged her tight and let her lead me by the hand toward the table where Daniel was standing with his girlfriend, a woman named Cassandra, and several people I didn't recognize. Daniel had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Hey, Rachel. Glad you could make it. Happy to be here for Lily," I said, which was true enough. We had managed, over the years, to land somewhere in the category of civil. Not warm, not close, but civil. Divorce will do that to you when there's a child in the middle. You either figure out how to be adults, or you make your kid pay the price. We'd chosen the former. Cassandra gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and said something about how nice it was that I could join them. She was pretty in that deliberately assembled way, all highlights and structured blazer, and she had the body language of a woman who had claimed her territory and wanted everyone to know it. I didn't hold it against her. I understood the instinct. Her brother, though, her brother was a different situation entirely. He was introduced to me as Marcus. Late 30s, broad shoulders, the kind of confident that fills up a room before the person does. He was a lawyer. He made sure everyone knew this within the first 4 minutes of conversation. He worked at a firm in downtown Los Angeles, he said. Civil litigation. He had a trial coming up that he described as career-defining. He laughed too loudly at his own observations and had the handshake of a man who thinks grip strength communicates something profound about character. He looked at me the way certain men look at women they have already quietly categorized and dismissed. Pleasant enough, but with an underlying assumption that I was decoration at this table. A mother, an ex-wife. Background furniture. I smiled and asked Lily if she wanted to go look at the balloon arrangement by the window. We sat down for dinner an hour later. I was placed at the far end of the long table, between Lily and one of Grandma Ruth's sisters, an older woman named Gloria, who spent most of the meal telling me about her sourdough starter. I was genuinely happy to hear about Gloria's sourdough starter. It was, by a considerable distance, the most pleasant conversation I had at that table. Marcus was seated diagonally across from me. He spent the salad course talking about a case he'd recently won, a detail which he managed to mention 3 separate times in slightly different phrasings, as if the information might not have fully landed the first 2 times. His girlfriend, a thin woman with very straight posture, laughed at everything he said. I ate my salad and listened to Gloria explain the difference between a starter that was merely active and one that was truly alive. It was during the main course that Marcus turned his full attention to me for the first time. "So Rachel," he said, setting down his fork with the air of someone about to do me a favor, "Cassie tells me you're in law too." "That's right," I said. "What kind of work?" "Federal court," I said. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're deciding how interested to appear. "Prosecution? Defense?" "Neither," I said. He waited. I didn't elaborate immediately, which seemed to mildly irritate him. "So you're administrative, clerking?" I took a sip of water. No. Lily tugged my sleeve to show me that she'd arranged her green beans into the shape of a star, which I told her was genuinely impressive, because it was. When I looked back up, Marcus was still watching me with the particular expression of a man waiting for an answer that will allow him to properly rank me in his mental hierarchy. "I'm a judge," I said. There was a brief pause. "Federal?" he said. "Yes," he laughed. Not a mean laugh, more the laugh of a man recalibrating. "How old are you?" 32. "Huh." He picked his fork back up. "That's young for federal. Which district?" I told him. Something shifted in his expression very slightly, quickly covered. He glanced at Cassandra, and then back at me. "Central District. That's a busy bench." "It is," I agreed. "What kind of cases?" "Mix of things. Civil, some white-collar criminal matters." He nodded again, but differently this time. The dismissiveness was still there, but now accompanied by something more careful, like a man doing math in his head. Dinner continued. Grandma Ruth gave a speech that made 3 people cry, including Lily, which made me tear up too because my daughter's heart is so wide open it sometimes takes my breath away. We ate chocolate cake. Gloria told me she'd once forgotten her starter at a vacation rental in Sedona and driven 3 hours back to retrieve it, which I found both absurd and deeply relatable. It was during coffee that everything changed. Marcus had drifted into a conversation with one of Daniel's cousins, a man I vaguely remembered from the wedding years ago. I wasn't paying close attention. I was helping Lily scrape the last of the frosting off her plate, but I caught the shape of the conversation because Marcus's voice carried. He was talking about his upcoming trial, the career-defining one, and he was not being particularly discreet. He mentioned a company name. He mentioned a type of financial claim. He mentioned the federal district. My district. I kept my face completely still and helped Lily with her frosting. He had no idea. That was the thing that struck me most. He was so thoroughly convinced that the woman across the table from him was ambient, was backdrop, was a minor character in the story of his important evening, that it did not even occur to him to be careful about what he said in my presence. He told Daniel's cousin that this case was going to make his career. He said the judge assigned to it was new to these kinds of cases, and he was planning to walk right through her. He said, and I remember this, precisely because it lodged in me like a splinter. They put these inexperienced people on the bench and then wonder why the outcomes are inconsistent. I've been practicing for 12 years. I know exactly how to handle someone who doesn't know what they're doing. Daniel's cousin said something I couldn't hear. Marcus laughed. "Oh, I'm not worried. I know how to read a room. I've been in front of a lot of judges. You learn to figure out who you're dealing with pretty fast." I took a sip of my coffee. Lily leaned against my arm and said she was sleepy, which meant she was probably 20 minutes from a full shutdown. I started mentally calculating the logistics of saying my goodbyes. And then Cassandra, in what I think was a genuine attempt at small talk, said to her brother across the table, "Rachel's a federal judge too, actually, Central District." Marcus froze. It was small, a half-second thing, but I have spent years watching people on witness stands, and I know exactly what the face of a man rapidly reconstructing a situation looks like. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Is that right?" he said slowly. "It is," I said. Another pause. Lily had now fully committed to using my shoulder as a pillow. I smoothed her hair back from her face. "What's your last name?" he said. And even as the words came out, I could see him already knowing the answer was going to be a problem. I told him. The color left his face in a way that was almost interesting to watch from a clinical standpoint. Because my last name, it turned out the last name I had returned to after my divorce, my mother's family name, the name on my judicial appointment, the name on every filing in the Central District Federal Court, was the same last name attached to the judge, assigned to his career-defining trial. His very big case. Starting in 11 days, he stared at me. I watched him go through denial, recalculation, and a very specific species of horror in approximately 4 seconds. "You're Judge Whitmore," he said. It came out barely above a breath. "I am," I said pleasantly. He opened his mouth. Closed it. He stopped. Started again. I didn't realize. "I know," I said. Lily shifted against my shoulder. I kissed the top of her head and began gathering my purse, unhurried. Around us, The rest of the table continued its various conversations, largely unaware of what had just happened in the 6 feet between Marcus's chair and mine. "I should get her home," I said, nodding toward Lily. "She's exhausted." Marcus said nothing. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a curb he hadn't seen. I stood up, gently transferred Lily to an upright position, and went around the table to say goodnight to Grandma Ruth, who hugged me warmly and told me she was glad I'd come. I meant it when I told her happy birthday. I found Daniel near the bar and let him know Lily was falling asleep, and I was heading out. He nodded, watched my face for a moment like he was trying to read something there, and then said, "Hey, you okay? Marcus say something to you?" "Not really," I said. "Have a good night, Daniel." I drove home with the windows down and the radio off, Lily asleep in her car seat in the back, and I thought about a lot of things on that drive. I thought about the version of myself from 5 years ago, the one who had sat in a mediator's office signing the papers that ended her marriage and felt like the ground was dissolving under her feet. The one who had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with a second-hand couch and a box of files for law school applications, and told herself, out loud, to the empty room, "You are going to be okay." I thought about the 3 years after that. The studying, the clerkship, the appointment process, which was grueling in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, which required me to be sharper and more prepared than anyone in the room because I was the youngest by a decade and one of very few women, and there was simply no room for anything less than excellent. I thought about Marcus sitting at that table, 12 years of practice behind him, telling someone I didn't know what I was doing. And mostly I felt not angry, not vindicated, exactly. More like very, very tired of a particular kind of assumption. The kind that looks at a woman and decides, before she has said a single word, what category she belongs in and how much space she should be allowed to take up. I got Lily into her pajamas and her bed, read her 2 pages of the book we were in the middle of, and sat in the quiet of my apartment for a while after she fell asleep. Then I poured a glass of water, went back to my case files, and got back to work. I want to be clear about what happened next, because I know how these stories usually go and this one goes differently. I did not do anything to Marcus's case. I did not engineer an outcome. I did not punish him in my courtroom for what he'd said at a birthday dinner. That is not how I operate, and it is not who I am. And frankly, it would have been a profound betrayal of everything I had worked for. You don't get to wear the robe and then use it as a weapon because someone was rude to you at a steakhouse. The integrity of the court is not a personal instrument. What I did was this. I recused myself. Not because I was biased against him, though I will admit my opinion of his judgment had not improved over the course of the evening, but because the situation had created an appearance of impropriety that would have followed. The case, regardless of how I ruled, the opposing party deserved a judge with no connection to counsel. Marcus's client deserved that too. The law was clear on the standard, and I met it, so I filed the recusal with the Chief Judge's office the following morning. I included a brief, factual summary of the prior contact, a social gathering, indirect connection through a family member's domestic relationship, inadvertent disclosure of case-related information by counsel. That last part, the inadvertent disclosure, is what caused the problem for Marcus, because when you are counsel in a federal civil case and you discuss the details of that case at a dinner party in the presence of the assigned judge, and that judge has to recuse herself and document the reason, and the documentation includes the fact that you spoke about the case, and specifically about your litigation strategy, in relation to that judge. Well, the opposing party's attorneys were very interested in that. There were questions about whether the disclosure had been intentional. There were questions about whether Marcus had known who I was earlier in the evening and chosen not to disclose the conflict himself. There were motions filed. There was an ethics inquiry initiated by the state bar. I was not part of that process. I had handed off the case and moved on. But I heard, through the particular way that legal communities are small and information travels, that it was not a pleasant several months for Marcus. The case itself eventually settled. The ethics inquiry concluded that there was insufficient evidence of intentional misconduct, but noted a concerning lack of professional judgment in the handling of the situation. Marcus was not disbarred. He was not suspended. But he received a formal admonition, which lives in his bar record permanently, and his firm placed him on a kind of internal probation for 6 months that effectively ended his trajectory toward partner. The career-defining case did not define his career in the way he had planned. I only know this because Cassandra, who I ran into once at Lily's school pickup about 4 months later, Daniel had apparently brought her to a parent event, walked over to me in the parking lot while I was buckling Lily into her seat, and she said, very quietly, "I owe you an apology." I told her she didn't have to do that. "Marcus said things at that dinner," she said. "About you, before you arrived. About how you probably weren't very good at your job because of your age, and he knew how to handle judges like you." I didn't say anything, and I should have. She paused. He was wrong. About all of it. And I'm sorry I didn't tell him to stop. I looked at her for a moment. She was not the person I would have chosen to have in my daughter's orbit, not because she was unkind. I didn't actually think she was unkind, but because the situation was complicated in ways that had nothing to do with her character. Still, she was standing in a school parking lot apologizing for something she hadn't technically done wrong, and there was something genuine in it that I didn't want to dismiss. "Thank you," I said. "I mean that." She nodded. She started to turn away and then stopped. For what it's worth, I think he knew. Toward the end of dinner, I think he'd figured it out and just kept talking anyway, because he couldn't figure out how to stop. I thought about that for a moment. The image of a man who knew he was in trouble and kept digging because stopping felt like admitting he'd made a mistake. I had seen that exact pattern in my courtroom more times than I could count. Pride is a remarkable thing. It will convince a person to walk off a cliff rather than take one step backward. "Tell me something," I said to Cassandra. The things he said before I arrived. Did he know I was Daniel's ex-wife's then? She hesitated. Then, yes. I nodded slowly. So it had not been carelessness, exactly. It had been contempt, the particular kind that assumes the person you're talking about is too small, too peripheral, too easily categorized to ever actually matter. I had been in his calculation an ex-wife, a woman at a birthday dinner, someone whose professional life was adjacent to his own but surely not equivalent, and certainly not relevant to his plans. The miscalculation was in the equivalency. "Take care of yourself, Cassandra," I said, and I meant that too. I drove Lily home through the amber streetlight of a Thursday evening, and she chattered about her day, something about a disagreement at recess, a new song she'd learned, the particular injustice of having to eat her whole apple at snack time, and I listened to every word. There is a thing that happens when you have been underestimated for a long time. Not the dramatic thing, not the moment of reveal, not the satisfying reversal, though I won't pretend those don't feel like something when they happen. I mean the quieter thing that occurs later, in the ordinary moments, when you realize that your sense of yourself stopped requiring external confirmation a long time ago. When you drive home through amber streetlights, listening to your daughter describe a playground disagreement with the seriousness it deserves, and you feel not victorious, not vindicated, just solid. Like someone who knows exactly who she is and finds that to be sufficient. I had not become a federal judge to prove anything to anyone at anyone's birthday dinner. I had become a federal judge because when I was 24 years old, and my marriage was ending, and the apartment was empty, and the sourdough starter, metaphorically speaking, was the only living thing I was responsible for keeping alive, I had decided that the only opinion of my capability that would ever truly matter was my own. Everything after that had been the work. The long, unglamorous, deeply satisfying work. Marcus had called me inexperienced. He was wrong about that too, in the way that people are wrong when they mistake youth for inexperience and confuse years with judgment. I had been in more federal courtrooms than he had. I had clerked for a justice who demanded a standard of rigor I hadn't known was possible before I encountered it. I had prepared for my appointment with the kind of focus that leaves no room for anything else. Experience, I had come to understand, is not the same as time. It is the quality of attention you bring to the time you have. But none of that needed to be said at the dinner table. None of it needed to be said at all. 3 weeks after the school parking lot conversation, my mother called to tell me she'd heard through her own complicated network of information. She is the kind of woman who seems to know everything about everyone in a 3-state radius without ever appearing to seek information out that Marcus had left his firm and taken a position at a smaller practice across town. A step down, she said, by any measure. "Do you want to hear the details?" she asked. "Not particularly," I said. "Are you sure?" Because there are details. Mom, I'm just saying there are details available. I'm sure, I said. How are you doing? How's your knee? She sighed the sigh of a woman who has raised a daughter too even-keeled for her tastes. My knee is fine. You're really not curious? I genuinely am not, I said. And that was true. The case was behind me. The man was behind me. The dinner table with the white tablecloths and the garlic bread and the 30 people who had their own various opinions about who I was and what I was worth, all of it was behind me. What was in front of me was a Tuesday evening, a stack of case files, a daughter who needed help with a book report on ocean habitats, and a bowl of pasta that, for once, I was actually going to eat while it was still warm. Tell me about your knee, I said to my mother. She told me about her knee for 27 minutes. I made excellent pasta. Lily produced a genuinely strong paragraph about the migratory patterns of sea turtles. It was, by any reasonable measure, a very good night. And I will tell you the thing I think about now, when I sit in my courtroom and look out at the people who come before me, counsel and clients and witnesses, and all the human machinery of dispute and resolution. The thing I think about is not Marcus, and it is not the birthday dinner, and it is not the particular expression on a man's face when he realizes that the woman he dismissed is the one holding the gavel. I think about Lily. Specifically, I think about what I want her to understand, from watching me, about what it means to build a life. Not that you should wait for the moment of reversal. Not that the point is to be standing in the right place when the other person walks into the room. Not even that hard work guarantees a particular outcome, because it doesn't, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. I want her to understand that the work is its own answer. That becoming someone takes longer than a dinner party and matters more than a reveal. That the most durable form of power is the kind that doesn't need a room full of witnesses to exist. She's 7. She's not ready for that conversation yet. Right now, she is more interested in sea turtles, which honestly tracks sea turtles have a lot going for them as a subject. But I am patient. I have time. And so does she.